My best friend's husband was secretly terminating her pregnancies while filming her grief for his divorce case, so I helped her take everything he ever had. I thought we won, until his mother tried to bribe my coworkers for dirt about me. My best friend Joanna and her husband had always dreamed of being parents, and this was their 4th pregnancy. The last 3 had all ended in miscarriages around 10 weeks, and Joanna told me she was sure this one would be different. I was thrilled for her and suggested we meet for lunch to celebrate, but that's when she got a little uncomfortable. She told me that her husband, Michael, said it was better for her to stay home and take it all in today instead of going out. I understood, and she told me we'd catch up soon. But then things immediately turned weird. In fact, when I brought over a pregnancy care package later that day, Michael answered the door and took a gift saying Joanna was resting. Over the next few weeks, her responses got shorter and less frequent. I'd try to visit, but Michael would intercept me at the door saying Joanna was too nauseous for visitors. I'm a nurse practitioner, so my medical instincts started going off. When I finally got Joanna alone at a coffee shop, I noticed she looked pale and anxious instead of having that pregnancy glow. She mentioned strange symptoms that made me raise my red flags. When I asked about her prenatal care, she got defensive and said Michael researches everything thoroughly. I suggested she get a second opinion, but she quickly changed the subject and said, Michael knows what he's doing. Things escalated when I showed up at their house unannounced to drop off another care package, and Michael said Joanna was at a doctor appointment. I told him that was no problem and that I'd drive down to meet her there, but he instantly claimed it was very private and emotional. He even said so in an angry tone. Still, I went home. But when I texted Joanna about it, I got a response saying, it's fine. A few days later came the real wake-up call. Joanna called me crying about scary blood work results, but the call cut out mid-conversation. When I called back repeatedly, Michael answered her phone saying she needed rest, not stress. I drove to their house but found all the curtains closed and no one answering. I soon tried enlisting Joanna's sister for an intervention about Michael's behavior, and although Joanna initially agreed to meet, she canceled last minute saying Michael surprised her with a spa day. When I confronted her directly at that very moment about the isolation, she got defensive saying I didn't understand marriage. That's when, yet again 10 weeks in, Joanna called me sobbing about another miscarriage. But again, the call interrupted halfway. I rushed over to see her, but Michael blocked me and threatened to call the police for harassment. That's when I started researching reproductive abuse because my gut feelings were intensifying. Turns out I didn't have to do that, because 2 weeks later, Joanna surprised me with a call about a party they were having. It was to celebrate the life of their unborn child. She said it would mean the world if I could attend and help her through this hard time. She also told me to bring my popcorn. I didn't fully know what she meant, but given that was a phrase she used to use in college when she was about to do something badass, I had a feeling I was about to see some drama going on. And I was right, because when I arrived at the party, I noticed Joanna instantly seemed different. She was more alert and determined than I'd seen her since the moment she got pregnant. She caught my eye across the yard and something unspoken passed between us. She gave me a smile and mouthed at me to get ready. Then came her announcement. She clinked her glass after dinner and said she had something special to show everyone. She then went into the kitchen and brought out an empty bottle of mifepristone. My face instantly dropped, and so did Michael's. For years I thought my husband cared for me and for our baby. Michael stood up to interrupt, but Joanna's brother physically grabbed his arm and dragged him down. It seems he was made aware. Turns out he wanted to call our baby instead. Gasps echoed. He's been giving this to me in secret every time I was pregnant. He'd slip it in my smoothies, my meals. And for those who don't know, this is abortion medication. Michael lost it. That's not true. Sit down, Joanna's brother interrupted. But Michael wasn't ready to back down. He started trying to break free, to flee, but he couldn't. Joanna's dad was standing by the door, and he socked Michael so hard I swear I've heard quieter gunshots. Michael crumpled to the ground, blood streaming from his nose. The entire party erupted into chaos. Some guests rushed toward Michael while others backed away in shock. Joanna's mother grabbed her daughter's shoulders, pulling her close while tears streamed down both their faces. I pushed through the crowd to reach Joanna. Her hands were shaking as she clutched the empty medication bottle. She looked at me with eyes that held months of pain and betrayal. I wrapped my arms around her as she finally let herself collapse against me, sobbing uncontrollably. Call the police! Someone shouted from across the yard. Joanna's sister was already dialing on her phone while her brother kept Michael pinned to the ground despite his struggles. Michael's face was a mess of blood and rage as he screamed accusations at Joanna. She's lying! She's mentally unstable. I was trying to help her. He thrashed against the hold on him. You don't understand what she's been through. Joanna pulled away from me and stood straighter. She wiped her tears and addressed the crowd with a strength I hadn't seen in months. I have proof. Medical records, pharmacy receipts, everything. The police arrived within minutes. 2 officers entered the backyard while guests huddled in small groups, whispering in disbelief. Joanna handed over a folder she'd hidden in the kitchen. I watched as the officers reviewed the documents, their expressions growing more serious with each page. Michael continued his protests as they handcuffed him. This is a misunderstanding. She's delusional from grief. I love my wife. Joanna's father stepped forward, his knuckles already swelling. You don't know what love is. His voice was deadly quiet. You destroyed my daughter's dreams. You murdered my grandchildren. The officers led Michael away while he continued shouting about lawyers and false accusations. Joanna stood in the center of the yard, surrounded by family and friends who didn't know whether to comfort her or give her space. The party decorations, meant to honor lost babies, now felt like evidence in a crime scene. I guided Joanna inside to the living room. Her sister brought water while her mother sat beside her, stroking her hair. The house felt different now, like a prison that had finally opened its doors. How long have you known? I asked gently. Joanna took a shaky breath. I started suspecting after the second miscarriage. The symptoms were too similar, too precise. She looked at me with hollow eyes, but I needed proof. I needed to be sure. Her brother entered the room, ice wrapped in a towel for his father's hand. We should have seen it. We should have protected you. He was careful, Joanna said. So careful. He researched everything, knew exactly what to say to doctors, made me doubt myself. She gripped my hand. You were the only one who kept pushing, who wouldn't let him completely isolate me. The next hours blurred together. Police took statements from everyone at the party. Joanna showed them hidden cameras she'd installed in the kitchen, capturing Michael crushing pills into her food. She revealed a secret bank account where she'd been saving money to escape. She'd been planning this confrontation for weeks, gathering evidence while pretending to be the obedient, grieving wife Michael expected. As guests slowly left, offering awkward condolences and promises of support, I stayed with Joanna. We sat on her back porch as the sun set, the party decorations casting strange shadows across the the yard. I wanted those babies so much, she whispered. Every single one. I know. I held her hand tighter. He took that from me 3 times. Her voice broke. Maybe more. Who knows what else he did that I didn't catch. Her sister joined us on the porch. You're staying with Mom and Dad tonight. No arguments. Joanna nodded, too exhausted to protest. As we helped her pack a bag, she moved mechanically, grabbing clothes without really seeing them. In the bathroom, she stopped at the medicine cabinet. He had it all planned out, she said, staring at the shelves. Prenatal vitamins here. Termination of pregnancy pills hidden behind them, playing the perfect supportive husband while poisoning me. I helped her finish packing while her family waited in the living room. The house felt contaminated now, every surface potentially hiding evidence of Michael's deception. Joanna looked around the bedroom she'd shared with him, her expression unreadable. I'll never trust anyone again, she said quietly. That's not true. I zipped up her bag. You trusted me. You trusted your family. You trusted yourself enough to fight back. She gave me a weak smile. I almost didn't. So many times I almost gave up. Let him convince me I was crazy. We joined her family in the living room. Her father's hand was wrapped in bandages, but he stood tall as he took Joanna's bag. Her mother hadn't stopped crying since the revelation. Her siblings flanked her like bodyguards as they prepared to leave. Wait, Joanna said suddenly. She walked back to the kitchen and returned with the empty medication bottle. Evidence, she said simply. As they prepared to leave, I hugged Joanna tightly. Call me, anytime, day or night. She nodded against my shoulder. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I pushed you away. I watched as her family's cars pulled away, leaving me alone in the driveway of the house where so much pain had been hidden. The party decorations still fluttered in the evening breeze, a surreal reminder of how the night had unfolded. My phone buzzed with messages from other guests, all expressing shock and asking questions I couldn't answer. The news would spread quickly through our community. Michael had been so well liked, so charming. People would struggle to reconcile the man they thought they knew with a monster who'd been revealed. I drove home in a daze, replaying every interaction I'd had with Michael over the past months. The way he'd always answer Joanna's phone, how he'd block me at the door, his anger when I'd pushed too hard, all the red flags I'd seen but couldn't quite piece together until now. At home, I researched reproductive coercion and abuse, horrified to learn how common it was, how many women suffered in silence while their partners sabotaged their pregnancies, how the abuse was often invisible to outsiders, hidden behind closed doors and loving facades. My phone rang late that night. Joanna's sister told me they'd settled her in her childhood bedroom. She'd finally eaten something and taken a mild sedative to help her sleep. The family was taking shifts staying awake, making sure she was never alone. She keeps apologizing, her sister said, like any of this was her fault. It's going to take time, I said. She's been gaslit for years, made to doubt her own reality. The detective called. They found more evidence at the house, pills hidden in multiple places, fake prenatal vitamins. He'd been planning this for their entire marriage. I felt sick thinking about it. Every pregnancy a deliberate sabotage, every miscarriage a murder, and Joanna forced to grieve while her killer comforted her, playing the role of supportive husband. The next morning, I went to work but couldn't focus. My colleagues had heard about the party and peppered me with questions. I kept my answers vague, respecting Joanna's privacy while the investigation continued. During my lunch break, I drove to Joanna's parents' house. I found her in the backyard, staring at nothing. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of what she'd endured. I keep thinking about the babies, she said as I sat beside her, who they would have been. First steps, first words, first days of school. Her voice was hollow. He stole all of that. He did, I agreed. There was no comfort I could offer that would change that truth. The detective says with the evidence I collected, he'll likely get serious prison time. She picked at a thread on her sleeve. It doesn't bring them back though. Her mother brought us tea, hovering protectively. The whole family seemed to be walking on eggshells, unsure how to help Joanna process this trauma. She'd been victimized in the most intimate way possible by the person who was supposed to love and protect her. I'm proud of you, I told her. What you did last night took incredible courage. She gave a bitter laugh. I was terrified, but I couldn't let him do it to another woman, because he would have, after he got tired of me. We sat in silence for a while, watching clouds drift across the sky. The normal world continued around us while Joanna's had shattered completely, but she was surviving. That had to count for something. Her brother appeared in the doorway. The lawyer called. She wants to meet tomorrow to discuss next steps. Joanna nodded wearily. There would be so many next steps. Divorce proceedings, criminal trial, therapy, rebuilding a life that had been built on lies. The journey ahead looked impossibly long. As I prepared to leave, Joanna grabbed my hand. Will you come to the lawyer meeting? I need someone there who saw through him, who believed something was wrong even when I couldn't admit it. Of course, I promised. I'll be there for all of it. Driving away, I thought about the party decorations still hanging in her backyard. What was meant to be a memorial for lost babies had become the scene of Michael's downfall. There was a poetic justice in that, even if it couldn't undo the damage he'd done. The next few days passed in a blur of legal consultations and medical appointments. I accompanied Joanna to every meeting, watching her navigate the bureaucratic maze of divorce proceedings while still processing her trauma. Her lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia, assured us that with the evidence Joanna had collected, Michael would face serious consequences. But Michael wasn't going down without a fight. The first sign of trouble came when Joanna's mother called me in tears. Michael's parents had shown up at their house, begging to speak with Joanna. They claimed their son was being framed, that Joanna had always been unstable. When Joanna's father refused to let them in, they'd stood on the lawn shouting accusations until neighbors called the police. At work, I noticed colleagues whispering when I passed. My supervisor pulled me aside to inform me that someone had filed an anonymous complaint about my unprofessional involvement in a patient's personal life. Though Joanna wasn't technically my patient, the complaint suggested I'd overstepped boundaries and potentially violated HIPAA by discussing her medical situation. I know this is bogus, my supervisor said, but we have to investigate. You understand. I understood perfectly. Michael was fighting back from behind bars. Joanna called me that evening, her voice shaking. He's been calling his family from jail. They're spreading rumors about me, saying I faked the evidence, that I'm mentally ill. The next morning, I found my car tires slashed in the hospital parking lot. Security footage showed a figure in a hoodie, impossible to identify. But I knew. Michael's reach extended beyond his cell. At the lawyer's office, Patricia laid out the harsh reality. He's hired a top defense attorney. They're going to claim emotional distress, temporary insanity, even that Joanna consented to the medication to avoid pregnancy. Joanna's hands clenched into fists. That's insane. I have videos of him crushing pills. They'll claim the videos are staged, that you set him up. Patricia's expression situation was grim. We need to prepare for character assassination. The campaign began immediately. Michael's family launched a social media crusade, posting old photos of him and Joanna looking happy, writing long posts about how Joanna had changed after her miscarriages, how Michael had only been trying to help his disturbed wife. I watched Joanna grow more isolated as mutual friends began questioning her story. Some reached out to me, fishing for information, clearly unsure who to believe. The man they'd known for years versus accusations that seemed too horrible to be true. One evening, while helping Joanna sort through paperwork at her parents' house, we discovered something chilling. Hidden in old medical files were prescriptions for psychiatric medications in Joanna's name, prescriptions she'd never filled or even known about. He was building a case, she whispered, creating a paper trail to make me look unstable. Her brother Nathaniel slammed his fist on the table. We should have seen this, should have protected you better. But the manipulation ran deeper. Joanna's sister called in a panic the next day. Her employer had received an anonymous tip about her involvement in insurance fraud related to Joanna's medical claims. Though completely fabricated, the investigation meant she was suspended pending review. He's going after everyone who supports me, Joanna said, her voice hollow, trying to isolate me again. The pressure intensified when Michael's attorney filed a motion claiming Joanna had a history of false accusations. They produced affidavits from 2 women claiming Joanna had accused them of various wrongdoings in college, complete fabrications, but the damage was done. The narrative was shifting. I found myself under increasing scrutiny at work. Anonymous complaints multiplied. Someone reported seeing me stealing medications, a blatant lie that required hours of meetings to disprove. My professional reputation, built over years, was being systematically destroyed. One night, leaving the hospital after a late shift, I noticed a car following me. It stayed 3 cars back but took every turn I did. My hands shook as I drove to the police station instead of home. The car disappeared as soon as I pulled into the station lot. Joanna wasn't faring better. Michael's mother began showing up at places Joanna frequented, the grocery store, the pharmacy, always maintaining legal distance but making her presence known. She'd stare at Joanna with undisguised hatred, sometimes taking photos, sometimes just watching. She's trying to make me crack, Joanna told me. Make me do something they can use against me. The breaking point came when Joanna discovered she was pregnant again. She'd been seeing someone briefly, a kind man named David who'd been supportive through everything, but the timing couldn't have been worse. Michael's lawyer will use this, Patricia warned. They'll say you moved on suspiciously fast, that you were having an affair. Joanna's face crumpled. I can't win. No matter what I do, he finds a way to hurt me. We decided to keep the pregnancy secret, but Michael somehow found out. Within days, Joanna received a letter from his attorney suggesting she'd been unfaithful during their marriage, that perhaps the miscarriages were from terminated pregnancies with other men. The stress began affecting Joanna's health. She developed severe anxiety, barely sleeping, constantly looking over her shoulder. Her family rallied around her, but the strain showed on everyone. Her father developed stress-related heart palpitations. Her mother started taking anxiety medication. I wasn't immune either. The investigation at work escalated when someone planted expired medications in my locker. Only security footage showing I hadn't accessed my locker that day saved my job, but my supervisor made it clear. One more incident and I'd be suspended. Michael's family escalated their campaign. They hired a private investigator who followed Joanna everywhere, documenting her every move. They posted photos online of her smiling, claiming no real victim could look happy. When she looked sad, they said she was acting for sympathy. The trial date approached like a storm cloud. Joanna's evidence remained strong, but Michael's attorney had crafted a compelling counter-narrative. The devoted husband driven to desperate measures by his wife's mental illness. The grieving father who'd lost children too. The victim of an elaborate frame-up. 2 weeks before trial, I received an envelope at work. Inside were photos of me at various locations. My gym, my apartment building, even through my bedroom window. The message was clear. We're watching. Joanna received worse. Someone sent her ultrasound images of babies with threatening messages. Her parents' house was vandalized with spray paint calling her a murderer. Nathaniel's car windshield was smashed. Maybe I should drop the charges, Joanna said one night, exhausted beyond measure. Let him win. Get my life back. That's what he wants. I reminded her. For you to give up. But privately, I wondered how much more we could take. My professional life hung by a thread. Joanna's mental health deteriorated daily. Her family lived in constant fear of the next attack. The situation exploded when Michael's mother confronted Joanna at her prenatal appointment. Security intervened, but not before the woman screamed accusations in the waiting room. Other patients stared as Joanna fled in tears. That night, Joanna called me sobbing. I'm spotting the stress. I think I'm losing this baby too. I rushed her to the emergency room, my heart breaking as she clutched my hand. The baby survived, but the doctor warned that continued stress could trigger a miscarriage. We both knew Michael would somehow claim responsibility, another weapon in his arsenal of manipulation. Patricia called an emergency meeting. They filed a countersuit. Defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, alienation of affection. They're seeking damages that would bankrupt Joanna's family. The room spun. Michael wasn't just fighting the charges, he was trying to destroy everyone who'd supported Joanna. The medical bills, legal fees, and now potential damages created a financial nightmare. He's trying to force me to recant, Joanna said quietly. Make me say I lied to save my family from ruin. Her father, already pale from stress, looked ready to collapse. Her mother wept silently. Nathaniel's jaw clenched so tight I thought it might break. The family that had stood so strong was crumbling under the pressure. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I'd been documenting everything, every threat, every incident, every piece of harassment, but I'd also been digging into Michael's past, connecting with other women he'd dated, following paper trails Patricia's team had missed. I found something, I announced. 3 other women, similar patterns, pregnancies that ended mysteriously. One has medical records showing unusual medication levels during pregnancy. The room erupted. Patricia immediately began making calls while Joanna stared at me in shock. Her family surrounded her, hope flickering in their exhausted eyes. But Michael's team had anticipated this. Within hours, 2 of the women recanted, claiming I'd pressured them to lie. The third disappeared entirely. Her phone disconnected, apartment empty. Once again, Michael stayed one step ahead. The harassment intensified to dangerous levels. Nathaniel was jumped outside his workplace, though he fought off his attackers. Joanna's sister's husband received threats at his job. Even David, Joanna's new partner, found his business targeted by negative reviews and false complaints. I realized we were fighting more than just Michael. We were fighting a system he'd learned to manipulate, resources we couldn't match, and a narrative that blamed victims for their abuse. abuse. Every step forward met 2 steps back. Late one night, my apartment building's fire alarm went off. As residents evacuated, I noticed my door had been jimmied. Nothing stolen, but everything subtly disturbed. A message: we can get to you anywhere. Joanna moved between safe houses, never staying anywhere more than a few nights. The stress caused complications with her pregnancy. She spent a week in the hospital with threatened preterm labor. Michael's mother somehow appearing in the lobby despite security measures. I can't do this anymore, Joanna whispered from her hospital bed. He's winning even from jail. But something shifted when a nurse recognized Joanna's story. She pulled me aside and shared her own experience with reproductive coercion. She'd stayed silent for years, but seeing Joanna's courage made her want to speak out. Word spread through the hospital. More women came forward with similar stories. Not about Michael specifically, but about the pattern of abuse Joanna had exposed. A support group formed. Media attention grew. The narrative began changing from he said, she said, to a broader conversation about reproductive abuse. Michael's attorney tried to block media coverage, claiming it prejudiced the jury pool. But the stories kept coming. Women who'd been silenced, dismissed, disbelieved. Joanna became a reluctant symbol of their fight for justice. The weekend before trial, I stayed with Joanna at her parents' house. We reviewed testimony, organized evidence, prepared for the character assassination we knew was coming. Her family maintained a constant vigil. Someone always awake, always watching. Whatever happens, Joanna said, hand resting on her growing belly. I spoke the truth. That matters. But Michael had one more card to play. His attorney filed an emergency motion claiming new evidence, a recording allegedly capturing Joanna admitting to framing him. The audio was clearly doctored, but it created enough doubt to delay proceedings. Patricia worked frantically to disprove the recording, while Michael's team used the delay to escalate their media campaign. They painted him as a victim of the Me Too movement gone too far, a loving husband destroyed by false accusations. I watched Joanna grow stronger even as the attacks intensified. She connected with other survivors, found purpose in sharing her story, refused to be silenced despite the cost. Her family, though battered, stood firm beside her. The night before the new trial date, we gathered at Joanna's parents' house. The evidence was solid despite Michael's manipulations. The truth remained unchanged, no matter how he tried to twist it. We were ready. My phone rang as we finished dinner. An unknown number, but I answered anyway. A woman's voice, trembling but determined. I was Michael's girlfriend in college. I have medical records. He did the same thing to me. The room froze as I put her on speaker. She'd stayed silent for years, terrified of Michael's wealthy family and their influence, but watching Joanna's courage had given her strength to come forward. I kept everything, she said. Medical records, diary entries, even a recording of him admitting what he did. I've been too scared to use it, but I can't watch him hurt another woman. Joanna burst into tears, not of sadness, but of validation. After months of being called a liar, of having her reality questioned, here was proof that she'd been right all along. Michael was a serial predator who'd perfected his methods over years. Patricia immediately arranged to meet with the woman. Her evidence was damning, a clear pattern of behavior spanning over a decade. Michael had refined his techniques with each victim, learning how to better hide his crimes. But we knew Michael's team would attack this new witness viciously. They'd claim conspiracy, coaching, anything to discredit her testimony. The final battle was approaching, and Michael had shown he'd stop at nothing to win. That night, I stayed with Joanna, both of us too wired to sleep. We talked about the future, about healing, about the baby she carried. Despite everything, hope flickered in the darkness Michael had created. Tomorrow changes everything, she said, staring at the ceiling. Either justice wins, or he destroys us completely. I squeezed her hand, thinking of all we'd endured to reach this moment. The job threats, the stalking, the character assassination, the financial ruin he'd tried to orchestrate, but also the strength we'd found, the community of survivors who'd emerged, the truth that refused to stay buried. As dawn approached, bringing the trial that would determine everything, I knew one thing for certain. Regardless of the verdict, Joanna had already won something Michael could never take away. She'd found her voice, spoken her truth, and inspired others to do the same. The war wasn't over, but this battle was about to begin. The courtroom doors opened at exactly 9 a.m. I walked beside Joanna, her hand gripping mine as we entered the packed gallery. Michael sat at the defense table, his orange jumpsuit replaced by an expensive suit. He turned to look at us, his expression carefully neutral, but I caught the flash of rage in his eyes. Patricia had warned us about his appearance. His attorney had coached him well, clean-shaven, well-groomed, looking every bit the grieving husband rather than the monster we knew him to be. His parents sat directly behind him, his mother dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief. The new witness, Sarah, sat 2 rows behind us. She'd flown in the night before, her evidence carefully documented and verified by Patricia's team. Michael's attorney had fought hard to exclude her testimony, but the judge had allowed it. Sarah looked terrified but determined. As the proceedings began, Michael's attorney painted a picture of a devoted husband driven to desperation by his wife's mental instability. He presented medical records, the fake prescriptions Michael had created, twisted to suggest Joanna had been unstable long before the pregnancies. He showed photos of happy times, emphasizing how much Michael had sacrificed for his troubled wife. I watched Joanna's knuckles turn white as she gripped the bench. David sat on her other side, his presence a quiet support. Michael's attorney had tried to bar him from the courtroom, claiming his presence would prejudice the jury, but failed. When Patricia began presenting our case, the atmosphere shifted. She methodically laid out the evidence, the hidden cameras, the pharmacy receipts, the crushed pills captured on video. Michael's face remained impassive, but his attorney's confident demeanor began to crack. Then came Sarah's testimony. She took the stand with shaking hands, but spoke clearly about her relationship with Michael in college. She described the same pattern, the isolation, the control, the mysterious miscarriage after he'd been making her special smoothies. She produced medical records showing elevated levels of misoprostol in her system at the time. Michael's attorney attacked her credibility viciously. He suggested she'd been coached, that she was seeking attention, that her memories were false. But Sarah held firm, even producing a recording she'd made years ago of Michael drunkenly admitting he'd taken care of the problem when she'd gotten pregnant. The courtroom erupted. Michael's mother stood up, screaming that it was fake, that we'd manufactured everything. The judge called for order, threatening to clear the gallery. I felt Joanna trembling beside me as Michael's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. During the lunch recess, we huddled in a small conference room. Patricia was cautiously optimistic, but warned us that Michael's attorney would come back swinging. She was right. The afternoon brought character witnesses for Michael, colleagues who praised his dedication, neighbors who'd never seen anything amiss. His mother took the stand, weeping about how Joanna had destroyed her son's life with false accusations. She claimed Joanna had always been jealous and unstable, that Michael had only tried to help her. But Patricia had anticipated this. She produced records showing Michael's mother had been receiving large cash deposits from her son throughout his marriage to Joanna, money that matched withdrawals from their joint account. She presented evidence that several character witnesses had financial ties to Michael's family. The real bombshell came when Patricia called Dr. Martinez, an expert in reproductive coercion. She explained the pattern of abuse, how perpetrators often appeared charming and devoted to outsiders. She walked the jury through the medical evidence, showing how the timing of Joanna's miscarriages perfectly matched the administration of abortifacient substances. Michael's attorney tried to discredit her expertise, but Dr. Martinez had decades of experience and unshakable credentials. She looked directly at the jury as she explained how reproductive coercion was a form of intimate partner violence, designed to control and traumatize victims. On the third day of trial, Joanna took the stand. I'd never been more proud of her. She spoke clearly about her desire for children, her joy at each pregnancy, her devastating grief at each loss. She described Michael's behavior, the isolation, the control, the way he'd twisted her reality until she doubted her own perceptions. Michael's attorney cross-examined her brutally. He brought up her new pregnancy, suggesting she'd moved on suspiciously quickly. He questioned why she'd stayed if things were so bad. He implied she'd planned the whole revelation for financial gain in the divorce. Joanna answered each attack calmly. She explained the cycle of abuse, how Michael had made her dependent on him, how he'd systematically destroyed her support system. When asked about her new pregnancy, she looked directly at Michael and said simply that she still wanted to be a mother, something he'd tried to steal from her. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Those 48 hours felt like years. We stayed at Joanna's parents' house, phones constantly buzzing with updates from Patricia. Michael's family continued their social media campaign, but public opinion had shifted. Sarah's testimony had opened floodgates. More women came forward with similar stories about Michael, though too late to be included in the trial. When the call came, we rushed back to the courthouse. The gallery was packed again, reporters cramming into every available space. Michael sat rigid at the defense table, his parents behind him looking haggard. The jury foreman stood, guilty on all counts: assault, reproductive coercion, intentional infliction of emotional distress. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Michael's mother screamed obscenities at Joanna while his father had to be restrained from lunging at our side of the gallery. Michael himself remained stone-faced until the judge read the sentence: 15 years, with mandatory counseling and permanent restraining orders. Then his mask finally slipped. He turned to stare at Joanna with such hatred that security stepped forward, but he said nothing, allowing his attorney to lead him away. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. Patricia made a brief statement while we escaped through a side entrance. In the car, Joanna finally broke down, not in sadness, but in relief. The weight she'd carried for so long was finally lifting. The next weeks brought their own challenges. Michael's family filed appeals, claiming judicial bias and manufactured evidence. They continued their harassment campaign, though now more carefully to avoid legal consequences. My workplace investigation was finally closed, my reputation restored, though the damage to my professional relationships took time to heal. Joanna's pregnancy progressed normally once the trial stress ended. She and David grew closer, though she remained cautious about fully trusting again. Her family slowly healed from the trauma of the trial, though her father still struggled with guilt over not protecting her sooner. Sarah became an unexpected friend. She and Joanna formed a support group for survivors of reproductive coercion. What started as 3 women meeting for coffee grew into a network of dozens, sharing their stories and supporting each other through healing. Michael's appeals were denied one by one. His attorney abandoned the case when payments stopped coming. Apparently, Michael's family's wealth wasn't as extensive as they'd pretended. Prison reports suggested he wasn't adapting well to incarceration, his charm and manipulation tactics useless against hardened inmates. 6 months after the trial, Joanna gave birth to a healthy baby girl. I was there, holding her hand as she brought new life into the world, life that no one could steal from her. She named her daughter Hope, a testament to surviving the darkness. The support group evolved into a non-profit organization. Joanna became a speaker at domestic violence conferences, sharing her story to help other women recognize the signs of reproductive coercion. I joined the board, using my medical knowledge to help develop educational materials for healthcare providers. Michael's mother made one last attempt at contact, sending a letter full of vitriol and blame. Joanna burned it without reading past the first line. His father divorced his mother and reached out with a genuine apology, though Joanna wasn't ready for that reconciliation. David proved himself through patience and understanding. He never pushed Joanna to trust faster than she was able. When Hope was 6 months old, he proposed with a simple ring and a promise to always respect her autonomy. She said yes, though they agreed on a long engagement. The nonprofit grew, attracting funding and professional staff. We partnered with hospitals to train providers on recognizing signs of reproductive abuse. Sarah became the executive director, channeling her own trauma into systemic change. I returned to my practice with new purpose. The experience had changed how I approached patient care, making me more attuned to subtle signs of control and abuse. Several patients confided their own experiences after learning about my involvement in Joanna's case. Joanna's siblings healed in their own ways. Nathaniel became fiercely protective, perhaps overly so, screening every new person in Joanna's life. Her sister threw herself into legal advocacy, eventually leaving her corporate job to work for a domestic violence legal aid organization. 1 year after the trial, we held a celebration of survival. The original support group members gathered at Joanna's parents' house, the same yard where she'd exposed Michael. The party decorations this time celebrated life and resilience. Hope toddled around the yard, chasing bubbles, living proof that Michael had failed to destroy Joanna's dreams. Patricia attended, sharing news that Michael's case had set precedent for prosecuting reproductive coercion. Several other cases had successfully used similar strategies, putting abusers behind bars. The legal landscape was slowly changing. As the sun set on the celebration, I found Joanna sitting quietly, watching Hope play. She looked peaceful in a way I hadn't seen since before that first pregnancy. The hypervigilance had faded, replaced by cautious optimism. She still attended therapy, still had bad days, but she was healing. Michael had taken so much from her. 3 babies, years of her life, her sense of safety and trust. But he hadn't broken her. She'd found strength in truth, power in solidarity with other survivors, purpose in preventing others from suffering as she had. The party party wound down as Hope fell asleep in David's arms. Joanna's parents looked older, but at peace, their family intact despite Michael's attempts to destroy it. Her siblings chatted with support group members, the community of survivors growing stronger. I helped clean up, thinking about the journey from that first concerning phone call to this moment. The investigation at work had left scars, my car still bore a small dent from the slashed tires, and I'd installed a security system after the break-in. But watching Joanna reclaim her life made every challenge worthwhile. As I prepared to leave, Joanna hugged me tightly. No words were needed. We'd been through hell together and emerged on the other side. Hope stirred in David's arms, and Joanna went to take her daughter inside. The next morning brought news that Michael had been transferred to a maximum security facility after an altercation with another inmate. His commissary records showed no deposits. Even his parents had finally abandoned him. He was alone with the consequences of his actions. Joanna's nonprofit received its first major grant. Sarah called with the news, crying with joy at what they could accomplish with proper funding. They planned to expand nationally, creating resources for healthcare providers and survivors alike. I returned to work with renewed purpose. A young patient came in with concerning symptoms and a controlling partner. This time, I knew the signs to look for, the questions to ask, the resources to offer. She left with information about Joanna's organization tucked discreetly in her purse. The ripples of Joanna's courage continued spreading. Her story had sparked conversations about reproductive autonomy, about the hidden nature of intimate partner violence, about believing survivors. Michael had tried to silence her, but instead, he'd amplified her voice beyond anything he could have imagined. Hope grew surrounded by love and fierce protection. Joanna married David in a small ceremony, reclaiming her right to choose her own path. The support group flourished, becoming a lifeline for women trapped in similar situations. Michael served his time in obscurity, his charm useless, his manipulation tactics exhausted. Prison records showed he'd stopped proclaiming innocence, though he never admitted guilt either. He simply existed, isolated and forgotten, except by those he'd hurt. 5 years later, Joanna spoke at a national conference on reproductive justice. I sat in the audience, watching her command the stage with quiet authority. She shared her story without shame, offering hope to survivors and education to providers. Hope played backstage, a bright, confident child who knew nothing of the darkness that had preceded her existence. The nonprofit had helped prosecute dozens of reproductive coercion cases. Laws had changed in several states, recognizing it as a distinct form of domestic violence. Sarah had become a nationally recognized expert, consulting on cases across the country. My own practice had transformed, becoming a safe space for women experiencing reproductive control. I'd published papers on recognizing the signs, trained other providers, testified in court cases. The knowledge gained from supporting Joanna had multiplied, helping countless others. Joanna's family had found their own peace. Her parents downsized their home, the site of so much trauma, moving to a smaller place filled with photos of hope and new memories. Nathaniel had married, his protective instincts channeled into being a devoted husband. Her sister had become a prominent victims' rights attorney. Michael's parents divorced acrimoniously, their fortune depleted by legal fees and settlements. His mother moved away in disgrace, still maintaining her son's innocence to anyone who'd listen. His father occasionally sent birthday cards to Hope, though Joanna never responded. The last time I saw Joanna before this story ends, she was pregnant again, this time joyfully, safely, by choice. She glowed with the confidence of a woman who'd reclaimed her autonomy. David stood beside her at the nonprofit gala, proud and supportive without being overbearing. As I watched her speak to donors about the organization's mission, I marveled at the transformation. From isolated victim to empowered advocate, from silenced wife to national voice for change, Michael had tried to control her body, her choices, her future. He'd failed spectacularly. Hope ran between the tables at the gala, bright and free. She'd never know the full story of her mother's journey, at least not until she was much older. For now, she simply knew she was loved, wanted, chosen, everything Michael had tried to prevent. The evening ended with survivors sharing their stories, each one a testament to resilience. Joanna stood among them, no longer alone, no longer silenced. The community she'd built from her pain had become a force for change, reaching women Michael could never have imagined affecting. As I drove home from the gala, I thought about the call that had started it all. Joanna crying with joy about a pregnancy that would end in tragedy. I couldn't have imagined then where that concern would lead, the battles we'd fight, the changes we'd create. But that's the thing about courage, it multiplies. Joanna's bravery in that backyard had inspired Sarah to come forward, had encouraged dozens of women to seek help, had changed laws and saved lives. Michael had created a survivor who refused to be silenced, and in doing so, had sealed his own fate. The organization now operates in 12 states. Sarah runs it with brilliant efficiency, while Joanna focuses on advocacy and support. They've trained thousands of healthcare providers, supported hundreds of survivors, and successfully prosecuted numerous cases of reproductive coercion. Hope starts kindergarten next month, a bright, confident child surrounded by love. Joanna's new baby arrives soon, conceived in joy rather than deception. David has proven himself a true partner, supporting Joanna's work while building his own career. My practice thrives with purpose and meaning. Every patient who confides their story, every woman who finds safety and support, every provider I train, they all trace back to that morning when I knew something was wrong with my friend. Michael remains in prison, forgotten by all but the system that holds him. His story serves as a cautionary tale in training materials, a case study in recognizing and prosecuting reproductive coercion. He wanted control, but created a movement against everything he represented. Tonight, Joanna texts me an ultrasound photo. Healthy baby, growing perfectly. No fear this time, no hidden medications, no isolation. Just joy and anticipation for a child conceived in love and safety. I smile, remembering the woman who once apologized for doubting her own reality, now helping others trust their instincts and find freedom.